The translation of that is through adversity to the stars. In a more simpler English, with a great deal of difficulty, you can accomplish anything. And the truth is, you can be anything you want to be. Just put your mind to it, persevere, and you're going to be the Prime Minister of Canada. Because now that we've got Mr. Trudeau, and he's got a cabinet that are half females and half males, I guess the next thing is to have a female Prime Minister. Everybody agree?
Yes.
Good. Next slide. I already mentioned I joined the Air Cadets while I was in high school. When I finished high school, my parents needed financial help, and I had to go to work. At the time, the Korean War had broken out. Anybody from Korea? Good. We're going to be talking a bit about Korea. So the Korean War had broken out, and I could join the Air Force and be an officer for 5 years. I joined the Air Force for 5 years. Little did I know that those 5 years would become 28 years. So I stayed in the Air Force for 28 years. But during the rest of our discussion this afternoon, I'd like to not treat you like high school students. I want to treat you like men and women. No more kidding around, no more joking. We're going to be really serious about things. Is that okay?
Yeah.
No kid stuff. Next slide. Oh, who put that in there? I just said no kid stuff. Well, there is a reason why that's there. I want to share with you a military secret. The military secret is based on the game of Monopoly. But you gotta give me an assurance you're not gonna tell anybody about what I'm gonna tell you. Don't even tell your teachers, right? Don't tell your teachers. Next slide. It was top secret. Next slide. What happened was the Air Force did a lot of bombing during the Second World War of targets in Germany, and a lot of planes were shot down, and a lot of the Canadian aircrew were captured and sent to prisoner of war camps. The Red Cross, who have their head office in Geneva in Switzerland, arranged to send care packages to the prisoners because the Germans didn't give the prisoners much food. So the British Army Intelligence, which is known as MI5, Military Intelligence 5, asked the Red Cross to get permission from the Germans to include in the care packages miniature Monopoly games. And the Germans agreed. Now, MI5 had a reason for this. And the reason was, in the Monopoly money, in some of the little boxes of the Monopoly games, they put in real money. Real German Deutschmarks, real French francs, real Swiss francs. The reason is if some of the prisoners escaped, they would need money to buy train tickets or to buy groceries or meals. They also hid, next slide, they hid compasses in the hotels, and they printed maps of France and Germany and so on silk, because silk, when it gets wet, the ink doesn't run. If they had maps on paper and they got wet, the paper would disintegrate, right? And they knew that if anybody escaped, they'd be in the forest for a period of time, what have you. So they hid maps in the hotels, component parts that became files, and I think I mentioned compasses. So the truth is, the Monopoly game played an important role during the Second World War as far as our POWs were concerned. So that's one of the secrets. It was declassified in 1979. Next slide. That's a navigator's computer. The interesting thing about that computer is that it has no batteries. I think I have one with me. Two sides. This side, the navigator uses to calculate how fast he's burning the fuel, the time he's going to arrival at the destination, the true altitude of the aircraft, that kind of mathematics. For the benefit of the teachers, that's a circular slide rule. On this side, the navigator calculates the wind. Got to know the wind all the time. Otherwise you get blown off the track and who knows where you're going to end up. Next slide. Oh yeah, I didn't mention, no batteries. So you don't have to worry about ending up with dead batteries. Next slide. Now, navigator has to have a real good understanding of maps. You see, no map is perfect. Have you ever peeled an orange and tried to do it in one long piece? Now that orange, that peel started as a globe, right? But when you peel it all out and laid it on a table, it doesn't look like a globe. It's all spread out all over the place. And yet it represents the orange. Well, if you try to put the picture of the Earth on a piece of paper, just the logic of knowing what you did with an orange tells you that that map cannot be correct. Something's wrong. Now, depending upon the way the map is made, you can control what's important to you to be correct. So if the shapes that you can see on the Earth are more important, you need a certain kind of map. If direction is more important, you need another kind of map. So an understanding of maps is very important for a navigator. Next slide. Now that's a Dakota aircraft designation as a DC-3. The DC-3 is a 2-engine aircraft, seats about 20 people, and that was the aircraft I was trained on as a navigator. Eventually I graduated, next slide, and I went off to the Korean War. I flew on the North Star aircraft, 4 engines. The North Star aircraft could carry about 40 people, and at that time, at the time of the Korean War, the North Star was the largest airplane that Air Canada had. So Air Canada and the Air Force flew the same large aircraft. In today's terms, that's pretty small. Next slide. During Vietnam, and I had the good fortune to be in Vietnam during the war for a period of time. If it's good to be in a war zone, I don't know. But I flew the C-130 Hercules. We could put in 2 large tanks in the cargo hold. Everything that you see in red on this slide becomes seating. So the military say, well, you certainly need a seat if you're a passenger on our airplanes, but you don't need a very comfortable seat, and everything is canvas. And I think in the far end, I don't know if you can make it out over here, there are some seating set up. You're sitting on canvas. The Hercules can carry about 90 people, or 40,000 pounds in weight. And if we fill our tanks with aviation gas, we carry 63,000 pounds of fuel. 63,000 pounds. And we burn off fuel at the rate of 4,000 pounds an hour. So we can stay in the air for 12 or 13 hours. Next one. That's the plane I enjoyed flying. That's the Harvard. Pilot sits up front, the navigator sits in the back. You get a spectacular view because you can, without moving your body very much, you can see through 180 degrees more. You can see all around. It's very difficult though to navigate with the charts on your lap. Next slide. That's what I looked like in those days. Next slide. Now that was a bit faster. Flew about 300 miles an hour. That's a T-33 jet interceptor. Next slide. You know, the military have their own language, and I'll give you some examples. They talk about a bucket of prop wash. And when you're young and green, where's Millie? Pay attention. When you're young and green, and they say, go down to 3 hanger and get a bucket of prop wash. So you run down, you see a sergeant down there, can I have a bucket of prop wash? And the sergeant will say, oh my gosh, we just moved all the prop wash to 8 hanger. So you run over to 8 hanger. It's just a joke, because prop wash is the flow of the air over the wings of the aircraft, pushed back there by the propellers. So you got to be careful of terminology. They talk about sky hooks that hold the airplane in the air. No such thing. The weight of the pull-through. You're very often asked, what's the weight of the pull-through? Anybody know the answer to that question? What's the weight of the pull-through? When you have a rifle, you got to keep the barrel clean. And the item you pull through the barrel to clean it is called the weight of the pull-through. They're not asking for a weight, it's the name of an object, the thing that you pull through the barrel of a rifle. Shortly after I arrived at the navigation school, about a week or two later, they told me they forgot to give me my housewife, and that I had to go down to the supply section and get my housewife. Well, I had no idea what a housewife was, or I suspected I did because I'd already started to miss my mother. And I thought, this is a good Air Force if they give everybody a housewife. So I went down to supply, full of anticipation. I hoped the housewife was cute. I got down to the supply section, and they handed me a housewife, which was a package about this big. And what was the housewife? It was a sewing kit. Needles and threads and that sort of stuff, and spare buttons. Also in the supply system, they use terminology backwards. They talk about pens, ballpoint blue, instead of saying a blue ballpoint pen. So if you ordered some pens from the supply section, you wanted a dozen blue ballpoints, you want pens, blue ballpoint. And they're out of them. So they try to guess what your real need is, and they might send you 12 pens, ballpoint, black. So that's the way the military works. So I remember one time I needed some batteries flashlight, and I ordered 12 batteries flashlight, and they sent me 12 batteries aircraft. You know the difference between a battery for a flashlight and a battery for an aircraft? So I never did order Hanger's coat, because they might send me Hanger's airplane. Good. Next slide.